I gave you full authority in every area of my life. I just ask that you guide my steps and guide my hands and guide my words along the way so I can give you the most amount to work with in order to make these things happen. I can't tell you the amount of pressure and stress that removed from my life personally, but it took me fully submitting, which, if you're a type A personality entrepreneur, I'm sure you can appreciate how difficult that can be. Welcome to another episode of Kingdom First Podcast, God's Blueprint for Your Best Life. I'm your host, Jonathan Lautermilch, and if this is your first time tuning in, I just want you to kick back, relax, enjoy the episode. However, if this is your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth, your umpteenth time, I would love for you to go ahead and click that like/subscribe button. Once again, it massively helps the channel and helps us get this out in front of more people that need to hear this message. And more importantly, if today's episode resonates with you, I want you to share it with someone that needs to hear it, because sometimes it's the closest people to us are the ones that help lead us to our biggest revelations. So, this message coming from me means one thing, but, coming from you, sending it to, someone that you may know, a friend, a brother, a sister, a colleague, a parent, whoever it may be, could be the very thing that helps put them on path to living their best life. So once again, if the episode resonates with you, I'd love for you to share that with whoever you feel like would best benefit from this episode. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get the show kicked off. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite biblical principles / systems of God, which is the law of reciprocity and reaping and sowing. Now, I'm sure, regardless of where you're at with your walk with Christ, or where you're at with developing as a Christian, I'm sure you've heard the saying, you reap what you sow. It's a pretty popular saying, right? And if you're anything like me, when you first heard it, it didn't exactly make the most sense. And just to give you a little bit of context of, a little bit about myself and, my mindset, and a little bit about my upbringing was, I was brought up under the understanding of, money doesn't grow off trees, right? So there was a lot of scarcity type of thoughts and mentalities that were instilled in me growing up. And once again, that's no one individual fault. It's just how I was brought up, right? So the whole idea of sowing and reaping, essentially giving and then receiving, was something that was just very difficult for me to wrap my head around, right? So as I've gotten through, reading the word for myself, which has been, one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, and I highly recommend, if you haven't done that yet, start getting into the word for yourself, because now you don't have to worry about someone else's interpretation of that. You can actually read it for yourself, word for word, so that you can get absolute clarity and really start to develop your ability to discern truth at the end of the day, which is the whole point of this podcast and why I felt called to, start the Kingdom First podcast. So before we get started and start breaking some of this stuff down, I want to share with you one of my favorite passages that I think perfectly exemplifies, really how reaping and sowing works, because at the end of the day, it is a system of God, right? So this is going to be from the biblical passage, Galatians 6:7 through 6:9. And it says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life." So let's really start breaking down, what this passage means, right? So what I gather from this is there's two ways you can reap and sow, right? You can reap and sow from your desire, right? What you want to see happen, the things that bring you pleasure, the things that bring you joy. Or you can sow from a position in a place of truly giving, to actually give the help that person, to help that place, wherever you're quote unquote sowing at, and how that actually leads to a far better long lasting result, versus when you're sowing from the position of I'm going to give in order to get, eventually it comes back to bite you in the end. And, I'll share a little bit of context with this from my own personal experience going through this. So No, I'm an entrepreneur. I own a publishing company, and I've owned a couple companies in the past. Before we transitioned into book publishing, and one of the systems that I learned throughout that process was to add value, right? So if you're actually helping people by helping them first, well, typically business gets done on the other side of that, right? And ever since applying that principle, I found, I'll say a little bit of success in my life and the ability to bring in new business and more importantly, bring in people that are good fits, right, for what we're looking for. And to kind of give you another example too, this same principle can be applied outside of business too. It's reaping and sowing in your personal relationships. It's reaping and sowing in your health and your fitness, right? What seeds are you sowing to create more health for yourself in your life, to take care of your body at the end of the day. There's reaping and sowing in terms of building your mindset and your faith. Like what efforts am I putting in that are eventually going to come back and quote unquote reap the harvest, right? Now, earlier on in my entrepreneur career, I learned pretty quickly, like, okay, great. If I can give this thing away, well, this is going to lead to, X amount of people, right? They end up signing up with us doing business, whatever that may look like. The 1 degree shift that made the big difference for me was getting to the point where I gave without expectation. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I know it's something I have struggled with a large part of my life. Because when you're out there and you're helping people and you're doing all these things and then they don't reciprocate or they end up being rude or however that may be received on the other end, it can negatively impact you wanting to continue to keep sowing and to keep giving, right? And then we start to develop these expectations like, well, I did this, I should be able to get this from you. And in this instance, like, you should do business with me because I've already helped you with all these things. And then when that expectation isn't met, well, what happens is it just totally demotivates you, right, from wanting to keep doing it, right? And that's kind of nature of sales, right? At the end of the day. And you can even apply this to marriage. Like, hey, I'm doing all these things to help my wife and to make her life better. But hey, she's still not reciprocating in the way that I want her to reciprocate. And after repeating this cycle for longer than I care to admit, and I'm just telling you, just decades, right, going through this, I've learned something that when you operate from that sowing and reaping from the flesh, right, which at that point in time, I've definitely sown from my flesh. I'll be the first to admit it. It ends up attracting the wrong kinds of people into your life at the end of the day, right? And what I coined this as is, you can have transactional relationships or you can have a transformational relationship. Transactional relationships look like, hey, if I give you X, Y, and Z, then you're going to give me this back in return. The problem with that way of thinking is as soon as it's not balanced on one side or the other, that's typically where the relationship starts to deteriorate at the end of the day, right? Think about this. If you're an entrepreneur and you're going out there and you're going, hey, I'll give you this if you give me this and we'll do business together. Well, what happens when life happens and something doesn't go perfectly to plan on the surface? Or maybe something happens on your end as the customer and like, hey, I need you to work with me a little bit. You tend not to get a whole lot of grace when you set the relationship based on really that flesh sowing of I'm going to give you this, but I have this expectation on the other side, right? And if I don't get that thing, then I'm not interested in doing life with you, having a relationship with you, or continue to help you in any way. And by all means, I'm not saying to not have expectations, right? In those relationships, we should have expectations and we should be clear and upfront and all those things. But if you're going to come from a place of truly wanting to give at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're not giving from a place of to get, right? And I've experienced where I've made more money than I've ever made in my life before. Doing it this way from sowing from the flesh. But what I ended up happening in my life was I attracted a bunch of people that really did not care about me or my family or anything about us personally, it was all transactional. It was like, hey, if I get this, then I like you, and this, and then I'm willing to reciprocate. For me, I reached a point where I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was like, I don't want these kinds of relationships in my life. Like, I want people that actually truly care about me because I truly care about them at the end of the day, right? It's part of like not just doing life by, accidents, doing life by design. And, I apply this to not only my personal relationships, but, people we do business with too. We do life with the people we do business with. And at least that's the intention that we have with everything. So for me to go through and stumble, struggling with this for so long, I finally had this revelation where when you truly put God on the throne at the end of the day, everything else takes care of itself. When you're sowing from the flesh, it's because you don't have a true faith and belief that God's going to provide for you, and you feel like that you need to make all the things happen. It's up to you to make the marriage great. It's up to you to make sure that your kid ends up where they need to end up. It's up to you to make sure that the business grows where it needs to grow. It's up to you to make sure the employees are getting everything that they want and need, right? And I'm not saying there isn't you in that equation in order to make those things happen. But ever since me personally putting God on the throne and going, hey, I submit to you in all things, in all areas. I gave you full authority in every area of my life. I just ask that you guide my steps and guide my hands and guide my words along the way so I can give you the most amount to work with in order to make these things happen. I can't tell you the amount of pressure and stress that removed from my life personally. But it took me fully submitting, which, if you're a type A personality entrepreneur, I'm sure you can appreciate how difficult that can be, where we don't like to submit to anyone or anything. But to get to a place where I was finally able and willing to do that, once again, just gave me a ton of my peace back, right? So now that I understand that, yes, there's things I need to do to create these results, but at the end of the day, God's going to provide everything that I need along that mission that we're on. And he's going to give us the provision to make that happen along that journey. You tend to be able to put yourself in a way better place. So now when you truly start getting in alignment with that, and once again, if you want to find out a little bit more about, how that structure works with God first, spouse, your kids, your family, then your business, go check out my first episode. I broke all that stuff down. But when you start living it in that order and truly having full faith, and once again, not just your belief, but your action based on that belief, that's what your faith is. That's where I believe the blessing starts coming in. And now you're in a true position to when you go and sow seed out there by sharing your time, sharing your treasure, sharing your money, sharing your resources, sharing any and all ways that you can truly help someone else, better their life. And now you're giving from a place of going, hey, I'm just going to plant this seed with you. I'm going to sow. And I truly do not have an expectation on if you're going to reciprocate, what that's going to look like, because I know at the end of the day, God's going to be the one that brings the provision for my mission. So as I'm doing this, right, and you're sowing seed, now you're in a position to go back and go, hey, God, I need more seed at the end of the day so I can continue sowing. Because here's the challenge that we have when we start building up a large store of seeds, to say, is you can either sow it or you can eat it. And the problem is we tend to want to eat the seed versus going out there and sowing it and giving it to other people. Now, there's going to be a certain amount that you need to have to take care of you and your family and your business and all the different things that you're doing. So I'm not telling you not eat seed. Trust me, I eat plenty of seed, but I always make sure that I have X amount percent set aside that I'm able just to truly go be a go giver and go help people. And I've just experienced this enough times in my life to where I just know it's going to happen. It's not an if, it's more of a when. So as you start to make that transition to go, hey, I'm going to sow from my spirit versus my flesh, like that transaction to going more the transformational, right? Which is really what the spirit creates, is that transformation in those relationships. It creates all the difference in the results that you're looking for from people. And I found in my experience, when you truly go out there to give, people have this innate desire to want to reciprocate, which goes right back to the law of reciprocity. If you help enough people get what they want, you'll get what you want, as the famous Zig Ziglar once said. And it's absolutely true. But if you're not giving from the right place, you may get the results that you want at first, or at least it looks like it. But as you start to keep going down there, as it goes back into Galatians, whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. It tends to not work out in the end. It's almost like those movies where you got the evil genie that's like, hey, you can vote, you can wish for anything you want in your life. And you're like, great, I'm gonna wish for this. And then you get that thing, but there's always a twist. There's always something that gets skewed at the end going, that's not exactly what I thought I wanted or what I needed. Right. Kind of like Read the Small Print. I always think of that movie Bedazzled with Ben Fraser, if you're old enough to remember that one. Classic movie, but really drives home that point of like, getting what you think you want, but then having it not be at all what you want at the end of the day. When you start start sowing from the spirit, it reaches a level where it just truly transforms and takes over, and people can't deny it at the end of the day. And it's something that you can just feel in that exchange. And the person on the other side is going to feel it just as much. And then once again, that law of prosody is going to have that person go, how do I help you? Like, I want to be able to help repay what you did for me. And once again, this is where organically, as this starts to happen, this is where you really start to see blessing flow over your life. And it's been really cool experience for my life and my family and my company as I've leaned more and more into this. Because full transparency, like, even though and you've experienced it, you're still gonna have the emotions and the feelings of like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable, right? Because it's like, well, what if I don't get this back, or this doesn't turn out the way that I want? And once again, that's just you falling back into that flesh and into that control of like, hey, I need to control this. And that's where the discipline comes in. And I have to remind myself daily that God's on the throne and that he's got it to stay in that space, right? So I'm not saying that this isn't something that you reach one time and you go, hey, I got it and I'll never struggle with it again. I believe it's something that as you build that relationship and you start to have that proven to you, right? Which it will be proven to you if you follow it long enough and hard enough, you start to build a comfort with the uncomfortable. And you start to realize that, man, if it makes me uncomfortable, it probably means I actually need to do it, right? Because that's where all the growth comes from on the other side, right? So as you're thinking about this, and you're really dialing in like what it means to truly sow and truly reap, I think the first step's getting in, putting God on the throne, and understanding that he's your source, right? He's going to make sure you got everything that you need along the way, right? And as you start to build that faith and that trust, well, now you're in the position going, hey, I know that this will come back to me. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, or when that's going to happen, or how it's going to happen, or who it's going to come from. But I just know that if I go out here and I'm truly finding the best way that I can help other people with, what God gifted me to do, the result is you get you get a ton of blessing on the other side throughout that. And that may come in the shape or form of new business for your business. That may come in reaching a new level in your marriage of communication, intimacy. This may come to a new level with your kids, to where you build that bond even closer to them. It may even come with family members that you've been trying to rekindle those relationships with. So you can apply it to any direction of your life. But in order to grow, you got to first give, but you also have to give from a place of, I truly just want to give the give, and I'm going to detach myself from that result, which once again is one of the hardest things that you can do, especially if you're type A personality, entrepreneur like me. It's been one of my biggest challenges, and I still struggle with it every single day. But the more that I lean into it and keep my my mindset in alignment with what the word of God says, and continuing to build that relationship with him, I've just found that everything else takes care of itself at the end of the day. And most importantly, not just the results, but the types of people that we're attracting into our lives. I'm blessed to say that, I've got tons of friends and family that, we do life with, and, the clients that we work with are, we're not just doing business together, we're doing life together. Like, we're getting to know each other's kids and spend time with each other and planning trips and all these cool things that, start off as a, hey, like hiring us for our service, but it's turning into something much bigger and much deeper than that, which is really what motivates me and drives me in everything I do. Is, relationships super important to me. And it's something that I've had to learn the hard way on how to attract the right people that are truly in it for the right reasons versus the people that are just looking to extract as much value out of you as they can. And then once that value is gone, those people tend to dip out. So once again, I hope you got value from this episode. It's a little bit shorter than my typical one, but I also believe it's one of the most powerful systems that God has created. And it's also one of the most powerful biblical principles that you can leverage to create success in any area of your life, as long as you're understanding that it needs to come from truly wanting to give, creating that transformation, versus to be used as a manipulative tool to create a short-term gain for a long-term loss. So once again, if you enjoyed the episode, you got value from it, please share this with someone that needs to hear this. I know this is something I struggled with for a large part of my life, and God bless it. I wish I'd learned this sooner, but everything happens for a reason. And as always, if you have any comments, thoughts, feedback, I would love to hear them. Make sure you drop those down below. And outside of that, make sure you're getting your word in with God and go all in on your faith. It'll be the best decision that you ever made. God bless. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Kingdom First Podcast, God's Blueprint for Your Best Life. We hope you found it inspiring, entertaining, and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on iTunes and Spotify. Your feedback means the world to us and helps others discover our podcast. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Facebook to stay updated on upcoming episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and everything else. Thank you again for being a part of our podcast community. Until next time, stay all in.